Welcome back to MythVision Podcast, ladies and gentlemen. We have Gnostic Informant, Neal Sendlak. What's up, brother?
I'm loving this set. This is a nice spot you got going on here. I'm having some fun. Let's do this.
Thanks, man. Yeah, so let's dive right in, okay? Sure. 3 years or so ago, you started the YouTube channel. You've been an explorer into areas that you feel are like almost not discussed enough online. I'm the same way. In fact, I think we're cut from the exact same cloth of wanting to know. At first, it was extremely fringe stuff that I was into. You have to kind of be thankful for those things. People want to just, but it helps you hone in your skills of what you think is really the case as you explore and get deeper into studies, primary sources. You are one of the few people I know who will open up a book by a Greek name no one's ever heard of and just start reading some translation of something that is into some weird mystery cult stuff that's diving into some crazy, very few people do this, okay? But in recent times, you've been on the Danny Jones podcast, which got a lot of noise. Danny, I'm sure, is excited about the views that came from that because there's a lot of stuff you covered in that video. But this is all in response to what happened with Amon, and then Dan McClellan showed up on Danny Jones. What is the beef, if you will?
And then I made a response to that recently.
Right. Like, I want to get into a little bit of the beef. What is going on? What is your chip with Dan McClellan? And then also Amon Hillman and these guys. Like, I want to kind of discuss this issue.
Yeah, I love the great question. I don't have any personal problems with Dan McClellan. I think he's a great guy. I really do. I genuinely think that. I don't have any ill will towards the guy. I know in my recent video I did sort of question his integrity a little bit and question his honesty about some things, but I don't mean anything like, I don't think he's that, I'm not calling him a liar as a person.
Okay.
I'm saying I think that he was, in certain instances, for example, just to throw it out there, in the video I talked about him not admitting that he was wrong about counting the Hebrew words in the Bible, or the Hebrew words general, and counting the Greek words. He got that part wrong, and his public statement, it seemed like instead of just saying I was wrong, he had to say, well, I knew the answer, but I leaned into the wrong answer because I got the decimal off. And the decimal wasn't the issue because you gave an exact number. So I questioned his integrity there, and I questioned his honesty, and some people might think that's a little far, because Dan's a good guy.
Well, let's push it.
But I want to say, I do think he's a good guy, and I don't think he does this every day, or he's a liar or anything.
Right.
I think in that instance, he felt like he had to cover up himself. He felt embarrassed that he was wrong.
You think there's ego involved?
And I think it was a little bit of ego.
Okay.
And look, I've done stuff like that before.
We all have this.
We've all done stuff like that before.
Right, okay.
So that's why I just want to throw that out there. I don't think he's a bad guy, and people should stop watching him, or we all need to discredit him or anything. No. I think he's a great guy.
So let me jump in here for a second to tell you, like, I love Dan, right? For Standing Stones, the Masabah, delving into ancient Hebrew stuff, I think he's fantastic. There have been critiques I've had, right, where I'm like, damn, you're stepping on my toes, bro, because I have academics that are like literally pioneering ideas like Dionysus in the book of Acts, the Gospel of John, like clearly real good reason. Not like, this isn't just you have to stare too hard and then you see similarities. There's really good reason literarily to see that they are imitating Euripides Bacchae or other things from Dionysus. And I've wrote him personally, said, dude, love you, dude. I really wish you would reword this or rework this and come out at least being more neutral and more balanced, because PhDs from Harvard that I respect are doing this. And it stepped on my toes, which irritated me a bit, because we're supposed to be comrades. And what happens is when you do a video, everyone comes flooding your comment section. This has been debunked by Dan McClellan.
Dan McClellan. Those are the two I get.
But the real question is, how has it been debunked?
They never explained that.
Right, so that's what bothered me a little, and I think that bothered you. So my critique is when I have an academic I respect, and then they turn around and kind of jab the other academic that they respect, but it's outside of their field. It's not their expertise.
Yeah. Let me go back a little bit, because there was an off-camera back and forth that him and Dan and I had one time, and it was regarding the God that Paul believed in.
Okay.
And I noticed a statement that he made towards somebody, and I thought he was incorrect, challenged it. Maybe I went a little hard in this, but that's the nature of online. And I think he does this to other people. Okay. So I think it's fair game. Like, he calls himself a referee calling balls and strikes, as he said.
Got it.
So I think I'm just doing what I noticed he does against other people.
Right.
Hey, you're wrong. This is absolutely asinine. He says this all the time. He uses the same language he uses.
Okay.
So I'm doing it. I'm playing the game. I'm jumping in the arena. I challenge his thoughts on Paul's monotheism. Now, when I say monotheism, you know what I mean by that. I don't have to say monotheism as it was defined by 19th century historians or 17th century English scholars. I don't
Define what you mean for the audience.
Christian monotheism is that there's one God who's in control of the cosmos, and there's lesser daemons or angels underneath that. It doesn't mean that there's not other divinities.
Right.
It doesn't mean that there's literally just one God, like deism almost, but like a personal one God. That gets defined later.
Okay.
And I think Dan was trying to import that definition onto Paul, and I don't think anyone was doing that at first. So the point I'm making is, just to go back to what happened. I said, no, the idea of having a one or a demiurge or a good, as Plato calls it, the good, Plato calls it, that is already a developed idea for 3 centuries by the time of Paul comes around. It gets developed by the Platonists, it gets developed by Stoics with Zeus as the Logos, it gets developed by the Middle Platonist, where you have the one. Who else is developing these ideas? That's just like the law of the land in this time period. People, the Platonists and the Christians and the Jews, and even some of these mystery religions have their one God who's above the other ones. So this is like common ideas at the time here. So I pointed that out, and I got sort of gaslit by Dan in this situation. This has kind of led me into the being kind of opposing.
Antagonistic.
Yeah, so I'm just being honest. Putting this all out there. This might sound like I'm getting a little far with this, but this is just being honest. This is the history of it. And I got kind of gaslit where I got listed a bunch of books, academic books, that apparently I'm misrepresenting the sources, is what he said. You're misrepresenting. I've read these. This is what he said. I've read these sources that you're misrepresenting. If you want to know more about it, here's boom, 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 boom. Well, it turned out the first book that I opened up that he cited was saying exactly what I was saying. And it was citing books that I was talking about.
Could it be misunderstanding in your opinion?
Well, no, there was, Jason.
What is his position? Steelman his position on that. Do you remember what he was saying?
If I steelman his position,
what was he suggesting Paul
He was suggesting that he said that for Paul to believe in one perfect God that created the cosmos with lesser daemons or whatever underneath it requires creation ex nihilo, which to be honest, I don't even know how I would steelman that, because you don't need creation out of nothing to get a one. Okay. Creation out of nothing also develops over time, and it gets sort of like concrete stamped by Theophilus of Antioch. I think it's like 150, 160, something like that. I could be wrong, maybe 170. So in that sense, that would be like, okay, that's way after Paul. But you don't need that doctrine to have a perfect one in charge of the cosmos that's all powerful. You don't need creation out of nothing for that. Creation out of nothing is about creation. It's not about divinity. So those are two separate things.
So you quoted the source that he said back to him in saying, like, this is what the book you just sent me says, and that created more tension?
I sent a screenshot of what was in the introduction.
Okay.
The person was talking about the same people I was talking about. It mentions Basilides, it mentions Plutarch, it mentions Plato.
Right.
And these are the people that I was mentioning, and I just thought, I can't. And so this is the part where I'm putting myself out there against someone who's credible, has a PhD.
Right.
And look, here's what I'm seeing, here's what you sent me, here's what I'm still seeing.
Right.
You would think you'd get a response back. Nothing, just gone.
Okay.
Which makes me think that instead of being like, damn, you know what, you have a point. Paul can believe in a perfect God who created everything and doesn't really need creation ex nihilo. Maybe I was wrong, but it's just no response at all. And there's other people that were commenting on this thing. Anyways, I don't want to spend too much time on this one back and forth, but I'm just giving you the history.
So this is building up the
whole tension thing. So then the Ammon thing happens.
Okay.
And so after the Ammon thing happens, I watched his video on Danny Jones, and I'm just noticing a lot of mistakes that I'm purposely noticing, and I wanted to make a response. Now, maybe I wouldn't have made that response if those things didn't happen before. Right. So,
and let me ask you, this is more of a personal psychological question. I think it's psychological. You notice that you're making critiques of Dan, or you'll make critiques of some other scholars. Why don't you do that to Ammon the way that you do to them?
Well, that's why I brought up the whole back and forth that I had online, being gaslit, being blocked, being told you're wrong,
the way
I'm
you
right,
were treated by Ammon is different in your view?
Yeah.
So because
and I disagree with a lot of Ammon's things.
But does he care that you disagree with him?
Ammon?
Yeah.
No.
Okay. So you're saying it is the way your treatment is that has caused you to kind of have this personal kind of, hey, we're having a battle here, and I'm bringing my sword and my shield, and I'm trying to battle these ideas.
And I wouldn't do that to just randomly anybody, but Dan's out in the arena too. He's out there making videos about other people, saying that this is complete nonsense, this is us, and I'm just kind of using that rhetoric and drawing off that same energy.
Right. Okay.
And I don't want to make it personal or get to the point where people are trying to, harm each other's lives or anything like that.
No.
Which we do see a lot on YouTube.
That happens a lot.
People try to get each other fired from their jobs
or
lie about people and try to make them get embarrassed in the public eye. I'm not trying to do that.
Yeah, I know.
But I'm trying to keep it strictly with the material, things I disagree with.
Right.
That's it. That's all I'm doing. To get into some of the details of the things that I noticed about his mistakes, just to be completely upfront, we can get into the details about this. I do not think that Dan has even a bachelor's level knowledge of the classics. And I could be wrong. That's just what it looks like to me.
Right.
It looks like when it comes to Roman religion, Greek religion, mystery cults, Platonism, Greek philosophy, Greek mythology, it looks like he is barely an amateur in this field, and he's out of his element. And he'll make statements like, he'll respond to a video online or something. And the video might be complete nonsense.
Right.
He might be fair to be criticizing this video. But then he'll say things like, there are no sources anywhere that say X. And I can find a source that says X. The question shouldn't be, is there a source that says X? The question should be, does X influence Y in these Christian texts?
Okay.
So to me, there's no doubt that we're going to find sources that look like what we find in the New Testament.
Right.
The question shouldn't be, do those exist? They do.
Right.
Like, spoiler alert, there are texts about gods that die and rise. The question shouldn't be, do they exist? The question should be, how much do they influence the Christian story?
Right.
And I'm not saying they plagiarize. I'm not saying they steal from. People need to stop using that language.
Okay, you're getting somewhere interesting. I'm kind of glad you segued into this.
Yeah.
We're dealing with dying and rising gods now. We're in the
I
phrase.
don't want to stay on the drama too much, but I wanted to.
No, I
People
understand.
are wondering why I'm coming out this fiery. I'm just telling you why.
First of all, let me give a little context there. Remember Fraser and Dying Rising Gods, because I want to get to this too, because I just listened to half of The Golden Bow, and half, believe it or not,
Amazing book.
people go,
Everyone should read it.
It took me, it's a 44-hour book on Audible. I'm 22 hours into this, and my drive was 42 to 44 hours of driving. So I did my best, and I'm just now getting to Adonis, and this is going to be
the best part.
Amazing. I know, and you said should have started there, but everything before that was necessary. So for those who don't know you, Neal, you're from New York, okay? You come from this hey, this kind of environment.
Yeah.
And you and me have bumped heads. You and me have clashed. We're like brothers. But you and me, when we disagree, we can disagree, don't we? So I feel like personalities too become a thing, because people see that and go, hothead, this and that. Yeah, you can be a hothead, Neal. When you're upset or you're fired up, you can be. But then the dust settles and you're able to communicate, and you're like, look, we're pressing you on this. We're debating. That's what happens when you debate. I think a lot of people interpret that about you wrongly and assume that's your character, or they overthink you have hate or animosity when you don't. You're doing what you would do at a football game. You're doing what you would do in your backyard when you have your friends in there having a podcast. You and me have done this. Now, I just want to say that as a character thing, that most people don't see that and interpret that in a positive way. They might think of it as oh, you're just out to attack Dan or something like that.
Right.
Or maybe he's maybe thinking that.
Yeah, and I just want to make one more thing clear. I am saying that it appears to me that Dan is out of his element when he gets into the classics realm.
Right.
But I do want to make it very clear, this guy is a bona fide expert in Hebrew Bible.
Of course.
Or even Christianity or Judeo-Christianity in general.
He studies
So I just want to make, if somebody's thinking that I'm trying to say he doesn't know anything at all, I'm like, whoa, no, not at all.
Yeah. I'm glad you're correcting.
Just want to make sure, because I was just criticizing a lot, but I want to make sure people understand that I know this guy knows what he's doing. He's been trained. He's under Stavrakopoulos, and he's
oh my gosh,
this guy's a legitimate expert in his field.
100%.
So I just want to make that clear.
Yeah,
questioning that at all.
Yeah, you're just saying when it comes
I'm sorry,
to Greek and
that,
Roman, just talking, I was just simply pointing out that you can be aggressive in communication, and they might understand that in a negative way to a point where they think your character or something is that way. But I'm like, no, when he's in the argument.
I am enjoying this all, by the way.
So you're having fun.
I'm having fun, and I hope Dan can have fun and do his responses to Amon and stuff and not take it all personally. It seems like he enjoys this because he's doing it on the TikTok. He's doing it he's responding to videos. He seems like this is the type of thing he likes to do anyway.
Yeah.
So if I'm wrong, reach out and say, hey, this is why you're going too far.
Okay.
But I just want to make it. I think this is not that we're not getting nasty, right?
I don't think so.
What do you think?
I mean, I think
Does
there's
it look like
tension.
I'm getting a little nasty?
I think there's tension.
Yeah.
I'm not that close to the fire, so I'm not getting burnt.
Okay.
But I think there's tension. I think that it could be reconciled. I think this can be easily resolved. The only problem is I think there is going to be ego involved and the arguments. And so let me give you an example. When we start talking about a category, when we disagree, we're guys, dude. I'm right, you're wrong. It seems to be a thing that we like to do. So you and him are disagreeing on monotheism. Is it Christmas stuff too that you and him are disagreeing on?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know if we ever... No, well, a little bit. I think Dan. I don't think we ever got into Christmas stuff.
Okay.
But I am a person who holds to that there's a lot of influencing from Roman culture, the Christmas season, the 12 days of Christmas. I think there's a lot of influences from the Saturnalia season, the Ides of, or not the Ides of March, the Calends of January. That season never goes away.
Right.
I just think it becomes Christianized. I'm one of those people who do hold to that. For example, the Lord of Misrule. And people might you can look this up. The Lord of Misrule is a tradition that we find in German and I think French or even English. I think English too. But they're all throughout Europe. They're doing this rite where they pick somebody to be the king of Christmas time, and it's usually someone from like the lower realms of society, and they put him up on a pedestal for the week, and he becomes. And we see this exact rite, and I'm using that word often, exact, but it's very close to what we find as from the king of Saturnalia, where they would take somebody from the lower realms of society, make them the king for the week during the week of right before leading up to the winter solstice.
Right.
So like we're talking about things that are like they're still doing these rituals. They're just Christianized now.
Again, you and me have a little bit of trouble granting or even believing that these traditions are completely and totally ex nihilo without influence culturally. And I think that's natural to think that these celebrations, these festivities, or these particular celebrations that we're having, holy days, whatever, did not come up in a vacuum just out of nowhere. They are culturally influenced. They're watching the others who are practicing particular things and readapting, recontextualizing them into their own context. And this is the problem I saw that you had. So we're getting off topic from Fraser and Dying and Rising Gods. We really need to get to that before we get to you and History for Atheists and dealing with the whole Christmas issue.
The thing I wanted to point out, and I pointed this out in the documentary about Dan, is that you're another mutual friend that we have, History for Atheists.
Yeah.
Tim O'Neill.
Yeah.
He does this too. I saw him do this in a paper that he wrote that I think was a dishonest paper that he wrote. It was a book review about a book about the Dark Ages. And when we talk about the Dark Ages, and I'll get back to the Dan thing, I promise. We talk about the Dark Ages. I just want to get this out the way first. We talk about the Dark Ages. It's already subjective because there's no way to measure dark and light ages. It's already subjective. Based on my worldview, if I want to call something Dark Ages, well, it's based on my worldview.
Right.
So there is no right or wrong answer here. Whereas this guy's trying to make it seem like there's one answer here. Scholars say this. If you say otherwise, you're wrong. And then he cites James Fraser as a book from 1890. That's not correct. The first edition came out in 1890. The book that we have today, that Amazon prints, is from 1936. It's been updated and changed. And you and I both confirmed this 5 minutes ago.
With Paola.
We called Paola and said, is this true that this book that we have, that everyone's reading and criticizing, is a 19th century book? She said, well, the book, technically the first edition was from the 19th century, 1890, all the way at the end of the 19th century.
Right.
But it's a 20th century book in the sense that the last edition, the edition that we have right now that everyone's reading and criticizing, is from 1936. We're talking almost 50 years later. It's been developed and changed and edited and fixed and peer reviewed. And this was the top scholarship of the time period. This wasn't just some random guy printing out a book in his basement. James Fraser was the top of the line scholar of his day.
And he was pivotal in the change of anthropology and comparative religion in period. He's a foundational piece, even if some of his stuff might be dated.
But let me just finish my thought on that. To call him a 19th century outdated scholar is incorrect. Let me tell you why. I'm reading, here's a list of James Fraser's works. His first thing he ever wrote was called Totemism in 1887. Then the second thing he ever wrote was the first edition of the Golden Bow in 1890. We don't even know how much was in there.
Right.
It could be half the book for all we know.
Could look it up.
I don't know. I'm just saying, we don't know what that is.
Okay.
We can't talk about that as the final product. That's let me give you an example. Let's say I wrote a paper, a dissertation, and I send it in for peer review, and they send it back to me. and say, that's no good, fix this, 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 and this.
Or in the next decades, you learn so much more too. You build it.
And that's what I'm saying. I was going to say, it's even worse than that. But let's just stay simple so everyone can understand this. This is a simple thing. I write a dissertation, I send it in, they say, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong, fix it. I get it back, I fix it, I send it in the new paper.
Got it.
But then you come along and say, hey, that paper that you wrote, that's no good, it's outdated. And I go, but this one is the updated one right here, and you just want to point to this one.
Yeah.
That's not legit. Right. That's being dishonest. But it's even worse than that. We're talking about 46 years later, updated, 3rd edition. It's a totally different book at this point.
Got it.
If we're going to criticize the book, at least get the date wrong. I mentioned Tim O'Neill because he does this in an article. He dates it to 1890. But that's what Dan says in the interview with Danny Jones. He says it's an outdated 19th century book. The Dying and Rising is an outdated anthropological model. The model in its final edition is from 1936, so it's actually technically a 20th century model.
Right.
Because it's being printed and peer-reviewed and accepted all the way in 1936. You don't go back to the oldest model.
Right.
You go to the updated one, the final product. So people keep calling it a 19th century. I've even heard people say 18th and 19th century idea. It's a 20th century idea.
Yeah, it's still alive into the 20s. Even if it started earlier, it's still active and alive. And they act like it's completely gone extinct, like it's completely a bad category. I know Dan mentioned that in the video with Danny Jones about this is anthropologically, like it's not a category that works in anthropology.
Yeah.
Paola, we called and asked her, and she agreed to some extent what was said, but also wanted to emphasize that when you're dealing with polytheism, they're agriculturalist societies. The category of dying and rising gods is a theme there.
Forgot to finish this. I'm sorry. But I said he wrote the first book in 1887, then he wrote the first edition, and then I went off on a tangent. Then you have Pausanias' translation, 1900. Then you have another edition of Golden Bow in 1900. Then he writes Sykes' Task, 1909. Totemism and Exogamy, 1910. Golden Boat, 3rd edition, 1936. And then he's written there's 10 other books he writes in that time period in the 1930s.
Got it.
85, I think if I had to do the math here, I would say between 75 and 80% of his books are from the 1930s.
Right.
That's where that's his area is the 1930s.
Got it.
So it's like to say he's a 19th century scholar, you're going off of one book that was printed in that time period.
Right.
That's not correct. That's like saying Derek Lambert is a 20th century YouTuber.
Right.
You lived in the 20th century. You were born in 1980.
I may have developed some ideas then.
Yeah, you might have, but you right now, you are a 21st century YouTuber in 2030.
I feel like we're getting lost in this. Your point, I get.
But I just want to, but that's important.
It is because
we're trying to push him back all the way into the Stone Age. It seems like when it's not that far off.
The older, the worse the ideas are. That don't take him serious stuff. But Paola Corrente's written a recent book and has done peer-reviewed work on highlighting that Fraser's idea here is not mistaken. Though she doesn't agree with everything he said, she is defending and saying that category exists. And she said on the phone with you and me that this polytheistic agriculturalist dying and rising God thing is the case. But then we asked her, because I know that Christianity specifically is not her specialty, we said, hold on, here you have a Christian religion that is on the rise here in the 1st century. I asked her, hey, is the dying and rising God stuff happening down into the Common Era? What did she say?
Yes.
Okay, so it's
which is not even it's
debatable. Not debated.
Yeah.
It's surrounding and in the environment. They're breathing the air of dying and rising God, polytheistic stuff around. Though Christianity comes off monotheistic and demonizes these other gods and whatnot, and wants them to worship one God, you have this Jesus character in the mythos of Christianity that suggests that you be baptized and to participate in the death and burial of this man god, who, by the way, Dionysus was also a man god, but anyway, there's also other stuff we can get into. You can then be risen with him, immortalized, and transformed. So the question then becomes, has it taken a new context? Has this agriculturalist dying and rising God theme now become part of a salvific cult? It's a different context, but it's still alive and well in a different context. Or do we have to then ex nihilo pretend this bubble of what we're seeing here, which we talked about being born again and stuff? Where is that in the Hebrew Bible? Where's any of that contextually found in Hebrew scriptures? I don't know where that is, but we can look to Greek and Roman antecedents and examples surrounding it where we see this at. And I just feel like that's ignored, and it shouldn't be ignored. It should be at least accepted.
Just to make this abundantly clear, scholars like Jonathan Z. Smith have come along in the last 50 years and pointed out things about Frazier that are maybe are outdated. The category itself, as like we can systematically go through and put them all into this category.
Right.
We can't do that.
No.
They all have their major differences. They all have their own cultural things going on. But as pointing out these details of gods that die and come back to life, that's a thing. And it seems like the criticism of Frazier, people get to smuggle in, well, because Frazier wasn't perfect, then that means gods didn't die and resurrect.
Right.
But they did.
Yeah.
The question is Christianity being influenced by that? And that's what I'm trying to get people to understand. The question about did those things exist in the sources, that debate needs to be over.
Yeah.
Because they did.
Yes.
And we can find those primary sources. I show them on my channel all the time.
Paola's written on this, by the way.
Paola's written on this. We have Inanna going down into hell, or Carnegie, for 3 days, being dead on a hook, and then being sprinkled with the water of life. You know, Josh Bowen talks about this. You have the oldest example of this, Inanna, being down in Carnegie, dead. Text specifically says this, and I'm referring to Samuel Noah Kramer's translation. People are going to be like, but you don't know Sumerian, how do you know this? All right, I'm appealing to Samuel Noah Kramer, one of the great Assyriologists of all time. His translation says that Inanna was dead for 3 days on a hook, transfixed on a hook, was sprinkled with the water of life by Enki. He sends the Gali down. They bring her up and resurrect her. Okay? She brings the dead up with her.
Right.
She raises the dead up with her, which in some Christian context, I don't know if the Bible specifically says this, but outside of the Bible, the culture of Christianity, and that matters. When we're talking about Christianity, we don't just talk about just what the text says. We talk about the culture. We talk about the rituals. We talk about the cults of the early Christian ecclesias. I want to talk about the whole thing. So you do get these traditions about Christ being in Hades for 3 days, and people are allowed to, and saving people down there.
Right.
You've heard this before.
Yeah.
So that seems like...
Go a little bit further, at least we could say something could be happening in Matthew, where they call it the zombie apocalypse, where Jesus rises and the saints come with him in a way, and enter Jerusalem.
So and this is important, and I'll get to other examples besides that.
We're not saying that they borrowed from the ancient Sumerians.
That's what I'm saying. The question isn't, is it true that there's a story about Inanna being dead for 3 days?
Right.
We know that's true.
Right.
We don't have to debate that anymore. The question is it possible that Christians in the first century are drawing from that?
Right.
Well, it turns out that Inanna or Ishtar was known by first century authors in the Greek and Roman world.
Okay.
We don't know how much they knew, or if they had access to the descent of Inanna's story. That's another thing. Maybe we could talk to Assyriologists about that. I don't know that right now. All I'm saying is the source is there. The verb to stand is used for Inanna too.
Yeah, so it's a resurrection thing, to stand up.
To stand up.
Right.
That's what Paolo Carenti points out. That's interesting. So how much do they know?
This is a good point, because when I just said we're not even saying that's what's happening.
Exactly.
But
I'm not even jumping to any conclusions.
Again, how often do myths get transmitted into other myths? And so now you which is the antecedent that may have influenced the story?
And that's another. So normally I don't even respond to McClellan's videos, even if I disagree. I just watch them and go. There was this one instance where they were talking about Christmas. So maybe there was a disagreement on Christmas.
Okay.
Now I remember it now.
That's why I thought
I couldn't remember, but this is right. I got blocked by him for this. Somebody was making a list of all the gods that were dead or born at Christmas. And it's wrong, obviously.
Yeah.
There's not. By the way, there is some truth to this, though, because if you read Macrobius' Saturnalia, Macrobius is arguing that all these figures, he says Adonis, Attis, I'm not kidding, he says Adonis, Attis, Asclepius, Pan, Apollo, and Dionysus are all born at the winter solstice.
Okay.
Which, obviously, he doesn't say December 25th, but he says winter solstice. He says there's a calendar where it shows the Dionysus and Apollo being babies.
Right.
And it says at the summer solstice, it shows them with long beards. It isn't like a direct, the language isn't like they were born on December 25th.
Of course.
But he is saying that they were born at the winter solstice, which at that time was December 25th. Remember, Gregorian calendar shift happens after this.
Right.
And the Gregorian calendar shifts the winter solstice, or the winter solstice from December 25th, which it was under the Julian calendar, to December 22nd. So technically, there is a source that does say these gods are born on December 25th. The problem is, Macrobius is way later than the Gospels. So you can't make the argument that or not even just the Gospels, because the Gospels doesn't say Jesus is born on December 25th. That tradition comes in the 3rd century. Macrobius is after this.
Got it.
So the Christians are already doing the December 25th thing for Macrobius. So you can't say the Christians are copying them. And the Sol Invictus thing is, the Thesis Sol Invictus thing is also after the Christians. Okay, we're all agreeing there. But there is a source, there are sources, and Plutarch is one, mentioning the birth of the divine child, Harpocrates. Divine child, Harpocrates, his main story is his birth, being the child of Isis. He's also the one who redeems his father, Osiris, by avenging him and killing Set. But his birth is the most important central myth to Harpocrates.
Right.
He's a divine child. According to Plutarch, written right around the time the Gospels are being written, 110, maybe 100, maybe in the 90s, I don't know. Plutarch was around from 64 to like 120 or something like that. I think he lives right around the time the Gospels are being written.
Okay.
Contemporary with, before the Christmas tradition was in December.
Of course.
He says Harpocrates was born around the winter solstice. And so I pointed this out. Actually, no, I'm sorry. I don't even comment on these videos. I usually just let it go. I disagree with him. Whatever, who cares? It's not a big deal. Someone else commented on the video, mentioned this source. And then Dan responded that this source is misleading somehow. And I was like, that's odd. And I pointed it out. How is this misleading? This is actually what Plutarch says. Here's the citation.
Right.
And then he responded and said, but it says around, peri. So it's not on December 25th. It's around December 25th.
Right.
And that's when I just said, so what? You're telling me that Christians in the 3rd century, there's no way that they could be drawing influence from a story about a god being born around the winter solstice?
Right.
After all, and I pointed this out, the earliest sources that we have was that they marked his birth at this January 6th, according to Epiphanius, 12 days after the winter solstice. That shift to December 25th became because of the calculation theory. I think you can merge both of those together.
So just so everybody knows what calculation theory is real quick, because you already know that we're in the deep waters.
Yeah.
Okay, help us out.
Explain
No,
that.
go ahead.
All right.
Go ahead.
So the calculation theory is
it's important you do it because
Peter Nothaff has a paper on determining how the Christians got the date of December 25th by adding 9 months to the day of his death, which was March 25th, which was when the Passover happened.
Easter time, yep.
So they do this gestation period. They claim, this is what they say that other Romans during the time period, when great figures died, they would determine their births 9 months after their deaths. And because they're divinely chosen, and it's the fate that brought him here. However, it's very hard to find any examples of Romans that died on a day where they try to find examples. There might be a few, but it's not common. This isn't a big thing that everyone's doing. So it sounds like there's some apologetics going on by these early Christians.
Or an etiological myth, maybe, of why.
But what I'm saying is, I'm not doubting that they're doing this. What I'm saying is, I think it's possible that they had the influences from this divine child being born around the winter solstice, just as Macrobius points out. And I think they're drawing from that, but they're also calculating the 9 months.
Right.
Both.
So they're
I think
inventing a narrative about the birth of Jesus, but couched in the idea of being influenced by earlier examples of divine child.
I think both of them can work together.
Well, that doesn't sound ridiculous. You saw my Asherah.
And by the way, you know who agrees with me on this? Religion for Breakfast.
Oh, wow.
Andrew thinks that you can have both.
Of course.
You can have the calculation and you can have them drawing from, because you can get them close to December. Because Basilides lived in the 1st century. Basilides was a Christian, they call him a Gnostic. According to Clement of Alexandria, the Basilidians were the first people to celebrate the birth of Christ on January 6th. Right? Now this is crazy. So if you're already close to the winter solstice, and it's not odd that in the 3rd century, Christians are going to say, well, let's find out let's get this thing tightened up a little bit. He was dead on March 25th. Let's do the 9-month thing. And then you get the calculation. And that's another thing. The Basilidians text sort of disproves the calculation theory. Because how can they do a calculation if the calculation theory is true? Then why is Clement of Alexandria telling us that the Basilidians are celebrating his birth on January 6th? I thought they calculated this. So there had to have been a time before the calculation took place when they had a different date, January 6th.
Maybe, yeah.
Which, by the way, some Orthodox churches still do January 6th.
And there's a lot that's happened on January the 6th that in other examples too, not just winter solstice. Right. There are other cults that do.
So Epiphanius points this out, and this is a later text from the 4th century, but Epiphanius is an encyclopedist. He was working in libraries. That's what he's known for. If you look him up, look up Epiphanius' works, he's written probably as much as Plutarch has. Like, this guy was the biggest writer of his time period. He was the chief librarian of the church. He was writing, he had access to sources. He's citing sources from the 1st century BC. That's how far back this guy's going in his writings. He's citing sources all the way back. And he mentions other cults. One of them is the cult of Dusharis in Arabia at Petra. And the other one is the cult of Ion in Egypt. Both of those gods, Ion and Dusharis, are closely linked with Dionysus. The Suda says that Ion is a syncretic god of Adonis and Dionysus. The Aristotle, or was it Aristotle? Not Aristotle. It's I'm sorry. It's one of the Neoplatonists, either Iamblichus or Proclus. It's one of those two. I can't remember which one. Mentions that Dusharis is a Arabian Dionysus. So there's already like some Dionysian stuff going on. Those are the two gods that Epiphanius says were born of a virgin on January 6th.
Right.
He specifically says that.
There's so much that, and you get into
I'm just pointing out that there's sources that are saying this.
Right. And I know that technically, we've talked about this before, where a lot of scholars might be misunderstanding you, like as if you think that Dionysus is.
Say, no, that's a late source. Let it go. Well, all I'm saying is,
that's what they
why
thought.
is it there?
They thought that. Which
I just want to know why he's saying this. That's all I'm saying. And maybe they're right. Maybe Epiphanius did find out some late rumor and just wrote it down. All I'm saying is, let's look at it. Let's look at everything. But even more than that, another thing that I think gets neglected, and by the way, to Dan's credit, in the Danny Jones video, he does say that there are Christians who don't negotiate any influences on Hellenistic areas, where I do think that there are some influences in the philosophy side, not as much on the mythology side. But I would push back on that and say that the Greeks aren't separating mythology from philosophy much. Most of the mythology is bringing in the philosophy, and they have a relationship, especially in the cultic sense, in the ritual sense.
What's this book you have called?
So this is called Greek Religion, from the last decade or two. I think it's from 2016.
Edited by Daniel Ogden.
I think it's from 2016. It's very up to date. It's just a whole bunch of scholars contributing their own dissertations or whatever in this.
Okay.
And the one that I'm bringing up, this is peer reviewed by Blackwell. I've been reading this and I'm learning a lot from it. It's a classics book. And so there's a passage in here an article from Kevin Clinton, an emeritus professor, classicist, who I just started getting into. And he says that, I'll just read the sentence from him. We refer to the festival as the Eleusinian Mysteries to distinguish it from the other mystery festivals in the Greco-Roman world. One of its legacies, mediated through Plato and Platonism, the philosophical side, is the mystery language of Christianity. Terms like mystical, mysticism, mystagogical, etc. all go back ultimately to the Eleusinian and ancient mystery cults.
He doesn't beat around the bush.
He just says it straight up.
Yeah, so that's what we need. We need more of that, because we've had this question, is Christianity riffing in the same vein as mystery religions in some way? And this is why I was bringing that up.
And that's why I make it clear, it's not plagiarism, it's not stealing from, it's not copying from, but it's also that they're all operating in the same cultural milieu.
Right.
So the technology, the technical terms they're using, the language they're using, the way that the Dionysian cults sacrifice, not just Dionysian cults, the cult of Attis and then Mithraic religion, they sacrifice a bull, and the initiates were either symbolically or literally, in the Mithras religion, literally washed in the blood of a bull.
Right, and you talked about that passage in 1 John where there's this idea of being washed in the blood of the lamb. So, okay, you have different imagery.
Somebody might say, but one's a lamb. You might get what's his name, Michael Jones. If Michael Jones was here right now,
he would die
say,
over the hill.
One's a lamb and one's a bull. They're different.
And that's the crap that we honestly think is so silly, because of course there's going to be differences.
Yes. The bull is Dionysian. It's always been Dionysian. It's actually related to Osiris, the Apis bull. The Sabazian bull is a lunar bull. There's a bull thing going on.
I mean, look, El was symbolized as a bull.
El was symbolized as a bull.
And so is Yahweh at times.
So is Yahweh. But here's the thing, though. There's a reason why the Christ thing is a lamb. Because of the Passover.
Right.
So they're Christianizing it. They're personalizing it. They're changing things. We're not disagreeing there. Yeah. All we're saying is there are cultural similarities and they're drawing from things.
Well,
they're drawing, and they're changing things, and they're even doing polemics.
I want to go a little further, and I want to go with a little bit with Dennis McDonald here, because you've got different scholars, academics we respect, love to learn from, have different opinions. You know, you got Richard Miller, who's doing a much more, I would even say he's looking more at translation fable tropes. He sees cultural as well, like we talked about, but there's certain linguistic, symbiotic connections, he says, that are clearly signaling these things. M. David Litwood does the cultural stuff. Dennis McDonald says, culture, I agree. These guys, I agree with you. These are more of a histories of religion approach. He goes, but we're not even focusing on the literary. He is much more thinking there is actual imitation, whether it's polemic or even in agreement with the source it's using, but that is literary. Yeah. So there's scholars out here who are saying, when you're doing mimesis, you're not Xerox copying plagiarism. No. You're reworking a well-established narrative into your own stuff. And this is what they might have been doing, and I think there's something to it.
Clement of Alexandria wrote a famous book, and everyone should read it. It's one of my favorites, called The Protreptica. It's called, or Exhortation to the Greeks. And he's purposely doing this. He tells you he's doing this. He uses Dionysian language about satyrs and maenads in the country, playing their flutes and dancing and drinking wine. But he flips it and turns it into Christianizes it. He says, instead of drinking and having orgies, get sober and get saved in Christ.
Right.
And he said, he compares Christ to Orpheus. Orpheus is singing a song of, he calls it like a orgiastic song or something. He says, but Christ is singing the song of salvation. And he's using all the same imagery, and he's polemicizing the mysteries of Orphism, Dionysian Orphism. You know, it's all kind of overlapping each other. He's using the mysteries of Orphism, and he's Christianizing it. And that's a out in your face example. Right. But as Dennis points out, the Gospels are doing this more subtly, where they're using the drama, the tragedy that we find in Euripides, that we find in Aeschylus, playwrights that they have.
Or even in Homer. There's a lot of tragedy in Homer.
Yeah.
And delayed recognition. There's all sorts of fun stuff.
The bard, the Gospel authors are coming at you like a bard, saying, curtains open, Christ enters the scene, John the Baptist, boom, next scene, this. It's almost like you're reading a play.
Right.
And it's almost like you're reading a tragedy. It ends abruptly. The women at the tomb
terrified. Went and told no one. And
William Attridge, is his name William Attridge? Is that his name? Yeah, William Attridge talks about how these are written like tragedies. And that's what they're supposed to be. That tragedy was the famous thing of the day. People love going to the theater.
Think of Socrates, bro. Like he literally
saw a theater.
He drank the cup in no fear, faced death. He could have exiled, but he didn't. He chose death. Well, what does Luke do? Paints Jesus in this fearless manner, facing death. Of course, he sweats blood, but scholars like BART EHRMAN, who's textual criticism, and notice we're in his expertise. We like him for what his expertise is. He will highlight how some of the sources don't have the certain elements that we find in the narratives we have today. So like they're adding, he's sweating with blood, or like they add this like fleshly component, because Luke's original version before that may not have had him sweating blood at all, may have had him much more Socratically facing death, which I think a lot of what we call Gnostics like to emphasize and stuff. So there's all sorts of stuff to emphasize there.
And so the focus at the time period is on salvation. That's what these mystery religions have all in common.
Right.
They have a baptism. A lot of these mystery religions, Samothrace, Eleusis, there's some sort of water immersion ritual. And it's called baptism. That's what the word is. Baptism means to dip. That's all it is. There's that. There's usually some sort of drink or food involved, like a Eucharist, right? The Eleusinian Mysteries has the koukeon. The Persian Mysteries has the haoma drink. The Vedic Mysteries has their soma. So there's there's a lot of that going on, where there's some sort of ritualistic drink consumption. There's the phrase in the Eleusinian Mysteries, I drank from the cup. I no longer fear death.
Right, and by the way, for anyone who's interested, again, we're going to kind of like go blast into the past. You just brought up Inanna earlier, right? The water of life, right? They sprinkle on her. Well, notice if you go back to the ancient Adapa myth, where he goes up to heaven, and Enki says, listen, they're going to give you the food and drink of death. Don't drink or eat it. When they get up there, Anu goes, how did Enki trick you? This was eternal. We were giving you the food and drink of immortality. Notice that there's this immortality motif, and then what does Jesus say? You must eat my flesh, drink my blood to live forever. It's the same very ancient concept of the food and drink of life, but repackaged and continuing in the motif of the New Testament.
And it's the main center and focus of these mystery religions, and I think Christianity also has this too, is the focus on hopes for an afterlife.
Right.
And this is what Socrates says about the Eleusinian mysteries.
And this is coming from that same book, from that same
Yes,
scholar.
from the same exact article. The participants in which we have sweeter hopes concerning the end of life and all time. Tu sompantos ionos. For all time. Ionic life.
Yeah.
Christ talks about ionic life.
Yep.
Our city was so reverent and generous that when it possessed such great good things, it did not begrudge them and others to let them share in things when it was received. So he's basically saying, like, how great are these mysteries? He uses the word mysteries, that they give people hopes in an afterlife, hopes in eternal salvation. I mean, that's the focus of the time period. These are competing cults. They're trying to sell people hopes for a better afterlife.
Right.
You know, it makes sense. This is what was going on at this time period.
So just bouncing back on track, because you brought up, most of this was discussing your beef with Dan, or at least your contentions. Where can we go from here to correct things or to make things better in your view? Because I don't know if there is seeing eye to eye on some of this material.
There's nothing we can really do. It's just we disagree on things. I'm pointing out what I see. I'm also putting myself out there with this documentary that I just dropped, whatever it is, rebuttal video about Dan. Maybe he thinks I'm wrong. Respond.
Right.
I've been waiting for something like that for a while now. You know, guy seems to be very much able to respond to TikToks and videos that if I'm saying something and I'm wrong, say it. Or if I'm right, hey, good point. That's all I'm saying. Like I'm fine with the back and forth.
Right.
But like I said, I don't want it to be, vicious or anything like that.
Do you think, other than the comments about,
keep it online, that's all.
Other than comments about him, how much of this do you think he would disagree with what you've said today? Other than maybe the disagreements of what he's already established about monotheism or whatever in his head, how much of this that you've said today do you think you would honestly disagree with? Because I can't imagine it'd be too much.
Well, it seems that he really pushes back on the dying and rising God thing, almost as if these sources don't exist. For example, you saw him tweet out this meme about Dionysus.
I saw that.
From the
and there was some stuff.
And there was a list of things that this guy said, and he leaves out the fact that Dionysus was a sacrifice who resurrected. That's one of the most central things to Dionysus. He's called the bull who fell into the milk. There's Orphic tablets. These golden Orphic tablets, they're famous. They're found all over ancient Mediterranean. People bury themselves with them. They bury themselves with little passages from Orphic hymns, calling out to Dionysus in hopes that they can be revived like he was. So they're little Orphic hymns referencing the death of Dionysus being torn apart by Titans and resurrecting, and them hoping to have the same result.
Right.
Dionysus was a resurrection god.
Right.
To leave that one detail, we can disagree on the details about.
I was going to say, let's agree.
The 12 disciples. He had 12 disciples.
Crown of thorns.
He had a crown of thorns.
Right.
Why do people keep bringing that up? These are all little minor details. They're all specifically for Christianity. Let's get into the bigger cultic, the ritualistic, what's behind it all.
Okay.
That's what I'm looking at. Dionysus is a god of life. He represents the swelling of fruits. He's not just a wine god. Not just a wine party god. People who say that just don't know anything about Dionysus. Read about him. Read about his myths. Read about some scholars that read about him. He's not just a wine god. He's a god of the swelling of the fruits, the growing of the crops, a life god, a resurrecting god, a god of rebirth. He is a resurrection god in a lot of ways.
And the fact that they wore these amulets in this particular Orphic setting clearly shows this is bigger than just agricultural, but that they had an actual salvific significance.
That's what the Orphics were doing with the Dionysian religion. They were taking it from its agricultural origins that go back to the Bronze Age.
Making it a personal
salvific. They were making
salvific.
it spiritualized, and they're influenced by these Pythagorean philosophers.
Right.
So like I said, that's what I was saying. You can't really separate the philosophy from the mythology, especially with these Orphics. As Walter Burkitt points out, Orphic and Pythagorean are almost the same thing.
Right.
You could put a dash there, Orphic Pythagorean, Orphic dash Pythagorean. Like they're literally like, it's almost like Judeo-Christianity. They're within the same.
Let me ask you a more personal, this is no more sources. We're going to wrap up this video here in just a second. I just need to ask, do you feel that as someone who's researching this deep, you take this stuff serious? You're serious about it like I am. Do you feel a little bit like here's this person who's putting himself in a place of authority in the arena in which we also want to coexist, but he has the answer. He's almost like the Bible answer man, except he is like the answer man of all these things.
Let's quote what he actually said is in the interview. He says, I started joining TikTok, and I noticed there's a lot of misinformation out there, which we all agree with.
I totally agree.
But he says, I wanted to put myself out there as the referee calling balls and strikes.
Okay, so he's doing that.
So
and a
he's
lot
doing
of it, you would say he's right.
Yes.
The thing is you think he has crossed over into arenas that really he shouldn't have
If you're
made
gonna,
these
if you're going to
jabs.
make yourself the guy calling balls and strikes, at least know the subjects in which you're criticizing.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying.
Or at least know them better, because you're saying, like, for this one, you feel in this one Dionysus one. Let's just
It
use
seems
that
like
as
it's
example.
more of his own emotional response than it is that he checked into the details of the sources.
Okay. It bothers you, in a way, to see someone who's putting themselves as an authority of being right into an area where you think you've read way more on this stuff than he has.
I would confidently say that.
And so,
For example, getting the name Semele wrong. The mother of Dionysus, her name's Semele.
right.
He says Samil in one of his recent videos. Like, you don't even know the name of the. That's like saying I'm an expert in Star Wars, and I'm like, and then you're like Jabba the Hutt. Like, you wait, what? You don't even know who Jabba the Hutt is? You're an expert in Star Wars?
Right.
You got to know the names at least. You have to, not knowing who Lucian is. I know I'm nitpicking here. Normally I wouldn't nitpick like this for anyone else. For some random scholar getting things wrong, I don't care.
Right.
But if you're going to make yourself the umpire calling balls and strikes, and you don't know these basic things, Lucian is just as important as Plutarch, but just as important as Cicero. He's one of the main authors of the 2nd century who gives us information about religion.
Right.
He's writing specifically about religion. Yeah. He writes the De Syria, which was translated by William Atridge, by the way. Great translation. The Mysteries Handbook. That's where you can get the translation for it. That book tells us almost everything we know about Arabian religion in the 2nd century Roman period.
Right.
Other than, if we didn't have that book, we'd only have archaeology, because the Arabs were not writing stuff down. So Lucian is you have to go through Lucian to know about Arabian religion in the 2nd century. So to not know Lucian, or not know what the Hilaria festival is, and to look at, and when someone tells you about the Hilaria and you go like this, like you've never heard about it, you should not be the umpire. You just don't, this is just not your field.
Or just say that isn't something I do.
That's something I don't study. That's it. We don't know. I don't know everything.
Right.
You don't know. Nobody knows everything. Right. I would never go and start talking about quantum physics or mathematics or
philosophy
biology
in depth,
or
modern
philosophy. Yeah, I don't know if William Kant or Hegel. I don't know any of that stuff.
Right.
You know, and I barely would even put myself out there to call strikes and balls and strikes about the stuff that I do read about. I don't normally do that unless it's something that I really feel passionate about or something that I really feel confident on. Mostly I'm not doing this. This is I've only made a few videos like this, one with Richard Carrier, one with Ralph Ellis, and then this one. Yeah. That's it. So I'm not normally doing this. I'm not normally, I do debate Christians a lot. Yeah. But that's just whatever.
Let us know what you think in the comment section, your thoughts, your critiques, what you think about the situation. And anyway, at the end of the day, this has been an interesting discussion going into some of the beef, if you will.
And this might be the closing of it too. This might be the end of it. So
yeah.
Hopefully that is. Well, we'll see. I'm open for responses.
Yeah. If you're wrong, it'd be cool to see some.
If I'm wrong, if it's you got me, you got me. It is
awesome.
what it is.
Well, thank you, everybody.